Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Imelda Rivera Laxton, and I am the curator of contemporary art and community projects here at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. I want to thank you for joining us for our monthly author book series. It's a free virtual program where we get to chat with a wonderful author or editor of a book or anthology. Today, I'm very excited to talk to Chief Curator Francesca Du Brock from the Anchorage Museum in Anchorage, Alaska. She will be talking about the publication, How to Survive Practicing Care in a Changing Climate. Um, this is she did edit this anthology, and this is part of exhibition and larger project of the same name. There were many collaborators and team members that are a part of this project. Francesca, thank you again for taking time to talk to us today. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you to tell us a little bit more about yourself, the museum, and just kind of the project.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Imelda, and lovely to be here with you all. I am a visual person, unsurprisingly, working in a museum. And so I prepared some slides that I think will hopefully help explain a little bit more about where I'm coming from, both in terms of the place I'm situated, and then also the exhibition that sort of gave rise to the book, and then hopefully about the book that we can talk about more. So let me just see if this sharing, can you all see that now? Okay, slideshow. Okay. All right, so here we are, the facade of the Anchorage Museum. We're located in South Central Alaska on Dena'ina Ełnena, Dena'ina land. And our mission is to be a museum for people, place, planet, and potential in service of a sustainable and equitable North with creativity and imagination for what is possible. So a rather broad and lofty mission, but a really sort of place-based focus to what we do. Um, the Arctic is a region that is warming at 4 times the rate of the rest of the globe, and our place is really undergoing immense and rapid transformation due to climate change. This means a lot of things, but among them are eroding coastlines, melting permafrost, declining salmon runs, and increasing forest fires. And all of this impacts human, animal, and plant life in the North. Indigenous communities who have contributed least to this problem and who often live in very rural areas of Alaska are being the most heavily impacted by this. So on the right, you see an image by the artist Brian Adams, who also took the photograph that's on the cover of the book. It's a photograph of some children in Newtok, Alaska, playing on what is an eroding bit of coastline in their community there. This community actually recently had to relocate 9 miles inland to Metarvik, and this is a reality facing many communities in Western Alaska that are being impacted by erosion and increasing storms. And then on the left, there's a picture of my dear colleague, Aaron Leggett. He is also the president of the local tribe. And this is a picture in the mid 90s standing in front of Portage Glacier, which is a major kind of tourist attraction glacier on the side of the highway heading south from Anchorage. And this is a place that all of us remember as kids going to. You could see the glacier right there. Aaron has a chunk of ice in his hand. And this glacier has actually receded so precipitously that it is no longer visible from where Aaron is standing. So the changes we've seen, even in our own relatively short lives, are very immense. Our work at the Anchorage Museum revolves around nurturing respect for and understanding of our place and also the ways it's changing. And we think together with community members, artists, and researchers in that work. All of this is kind of a long-winded way of saying that climate work really is our work. It's not an add-on. It's threaded through every exhibition we do in ways that are subtle and overt because it really does touch every aspect of life here, from food systems to infrastructure, weather, animal and plant life cycles and behaviors, lifeways, cultural identity, and sovereignty. and it permeates our relationships inside the building with staff, artists, stakeholders, and audiences. And I also want to note that it's deeply personal to everybody who calls Alaska home. I was born and raised in Alaska, and I think that this idea of like memory and familiarity with the seasonal rhythms of place are very important. There are shifts that I can feel in my own lifetime, and of course, Indigenous people who can trace these shifts going back generations through stories passed down from their ancestors. So in this moment, something I note in the book is that like I feel that every family photo album at this point has become this sort of like resonant um, archive of a changing climate almost accidentally because as you see in the snapshot with Aaron, the landscape around us is changing so greatly, even in the course of one person's lifetime. You can really feel palpable differences. And I think it's important that we pay attention and also acknowledge our role as witnesses in this time. So, I want to now transition to telling you a little bit about the exhibition and how it gave rise to the publication. So it was on view from October 2023 to January 2025 at the museum. And it was a project investigating how an ethics of care can help us address the climate emergency. It was 7,500 square feet. It included 16 contemporary artists, cultural belongings from the Anchorage Museum collection, a materials library incorporating products that creatively address overconsumption and waste issues, and also the Community Climate Archive, which featured voices from across Alaska reflecting on climate change. So here are just two of those cultural belongings from the introductory section of the exhibition. Just to note that, it was a contemporary art exhibition, but we wanted to sort of start people out with these items to remind folks that the North has been stewarded for millennia by Indigenous people who developed advanced technologies and cultural systems that really allowed them to thrive in an environment that is often seen as very harsh and unforgiving. And this contemporary notion of sustainability has been present in Alaska for a very, very long time. Indigenous people have an incredibly long history of using materials wisely that are seasonal or scarce. So, like this wooden bowl on the right, wood is actually quite rare in parts of the Arctic and Western Alaska. So, driftwood might be something that you would mend with this spruce root to conserve a bowl. And they also have, a long history of using materials that were introduced with colonization in addition to customary materials. So things like commercial flour sacks that were used for making parkas, or in the case of this harpoon here from the 1980s, a motor oil bottle as a float for the harpoon, which I think is also an amazing and resonant piece in the context of these climate conversations. But most importantly, Indigenous people have maintained cultural protocols of respect and reciprocity with land and wild creatures. And I think that is something we'll get to a little more in the book, just sort of like the words we use to talk about these different concepts and what they really mean in a local context. When working with artists and communities, I'm often trying to figure out how we can care about the process as much as, or sometimes even more than, the finished product. And with this exhibition, we really opened ourselves up to the fact that the process was going to lead. And if it didn't end up looking as perfect and lovely as a typical museum exhibition, we were going to be really okay with that because we were prioritizing the process. And so we articulated a few values at the outset. Those were the importance of transparency and reflection, valuing relationships with people over objects. So trying to be less transactional in terms of outreach to artists. taking steps to reduce carbon costs where possible, and then embracing risk and imperfection. So really leaning into this idea that we were going to be trying new ways of working. And if it was messy, we were going to be okay communicating that with our audiences. And working in this more iterative fashion with artists or more durationally with communities, it requires a lot of staff involvement and it also requires a lot of trust. And I think one of my main takeaways from this process is that often many of the ways that we kind of can find to reduce carbon costs on projects or strengthen relationships often result in an equal and inverse toll on staff time and energy. And so staff wellness really kind of became this
Yeah.
other spoke of the wheel that we hadn't considered going in, but that was like, oh, we really need to think about this. So I wanted to show just 3 artist projects of the 16 that I think kind of speak to the process we went through with this exhibition. This is work of the artist Gay Chan from Hawaii. You can see Gay on the left there. Um, this is a project called Carrying Capacity that she's been working on for over a decade now. It started out very simply. She encountered a pile of these straps out behind a store where she'd gone to get tomatoes to make tomato sauce. And Gay is a bit of a collector and scavenger of things. And she was just really upset by this pile of waste. And so she brought them home and to try and think of, something she could do with them. And these are baling straps. So they're used to palletize pretty much all goods that go around the world for consumption basic needs, which are obviously in places like Hawaii and Alaska, very, very common. So she developed a system of basket weaving to turn these baling straps into baskets, and she started teaching people how to do it. And we worked with her long distance. So we, on our end, were working with the fine folks of Costco here in Anchorage, Alaska. So you can see our lovely Costco contact on
Yeah.
the right. And then we were gathering these straps and storing them in our office spaces. Here you can see my lovely colleague, Rachel Bosenberg and Alex Tate behind her. And Rachel actually was the assistant editor on the book, so had a big hand in this project. And we sorted them, cut them, got them ready, and then you can see Gay's installation in the exhibition. Right here is a big bin of these straps, and then some of the finished baskets on the wall, and there were some video elements too. And then here you can see the way the baskets look as they're being woven. And so we worked with one of her former students online to teach us and to teach other basket teachers here in Anchorage who typically work with natural materials, not synthetic
Yeah.
materials.
Right.
And they all learned, and we taught each other, and we had all of these classes leading up to the exhibition. And there's now like this mini ecosystem of basket weaving in Alaska. Like other people have taken
Right.
it up, and it's really lovely to see. So this is Gay's project. Um, this is Carolina Caicedo's work in production. Carolina Caicedo makes installations, videos, and performances, and they often involve extensive field work and engagement with activist movements aimed at defending human rights and the rights of nature. And so she wanted to make one of her Cosmotaraya, her like hanging net pieces, using Alaska materials and alluding to the Alaska context. So these nets you see here are our typical fishing net up here. It's called a dip net, and this is sort of the iconic personal use subsistence net that's used in Alaska. So we took pictures. We sourced all of these nets on Craigslist. We got all of the beach refuse from a marine debris cleanup operation in Southeast Alaska. So it was all used in repurposed materials. We dyed, you can see my colleagues dyeing nets and buoys, floats, and then we sent all this material, and Carolina made a mock-up, which you can see here on the right, like a sketch. We assembled it in the back of house, and then this is what the finished sculpture looked
Wow.
like. Celestial Autonomy, The Dance of the Big Dipper, and North Star. So this was another example where the artist actually never came here, and we really worked in this like very integrated way, almost like as part of her studio to kind of like source materials and construct the sculpture.
Right.
And then here's a last artist I wanted to share. This is Minerva Cuevas, injecting a little bit of humor into the conversation. So she had created these three memes that we wanted to share, capitalism, climate change, and apocalypse. And we approached her and asked if she'd be willing to create a fourth meme featuring an animal that is endemic in the Arctic. And she was game. So we had her work with our teen climate communicators group. And
Oh,
through a couple of virtual sessions where they workshopped ideas and Minerva talked to them about her practice, they managed to come up with this, which is really awesome. The
pretty
picture
amazing.
is female, featuring White Gladys, who was the orca, the pregnant orca that was sort of sinking boats off the coast of Spain a couple of years ago. So a rogue animal taking revenge on the human world. Um, so this just gives you a taste. These were three artists. Many of the projects were similar in nature. So there was just a lot of dialogue happening with artists, back and forth problem solving. There was a lot of humility on the part of the artist to engage with us in this way, and a real commitment to like, again, process over product and to
Right.
kind of go into the unknown and be like, I hope what comes out looks great. It might not, but it's really about kind of attempting this together.
Right.
So that brings me to the book. The book. We wanted to, the book, so the book, we worked on the book after the exhibition was open. We didn't plan on making a book as part of the project. And once the project was up, we decided we really wanted to preserve this kind of dialogic and improvisational approach. And I do think that that's something that would have happened naturally because, to be perfectly honest, I had very little experience working on publications and particularly publications of this size. So I think a little bit of that like rough draft quality was inevitable. Um, and many of the artists in the exhibition, this is a view of Marie Watt's work in progress, they have skill sharing or sort of activism practices embedded in everything that they do. So their practices sort of served as a guide in prioritizing relationships and also welcoming uncertainty into the process. And we tried to follow that in the book as well. Um, so that meant a couple of things. That meant allowing artists to speak for themselves and supporting artists in particular who had maybe never formally written about their work before. It meant inviting interviews and more kind of conversational pieces, and also honoring other ways of knowing. So we tried really hard not to make a publication that was too academic. We had scholars, yes, but we also invited artists, journalists, members of the community through the Climate Archive, and visual essays from folks to kind of have a range of different types of material. So on the left, you can see Erin Gingrich's hands. She's an artist as part of the exhibition and includes writing in the book. And then Julia O'Malley on the right, who's a local journalist and really engaged around sort of fishing and waterways in Alaska. And then here you see on the left, Brittany Woods Orison, who's a climate activist in Alaska, a young person. And then on the right, Lorelei Ivanoff, who is a writer and artist in her own right. Um, oh, and here are the two examples of the visual essays. On the left, we have Intelligent Mischief, which is a collaboration between Aisha Shillingford and Terry Marshall. And on the right, a sort of visual poem, an illustrated poem by Ellie Schmidt. There was also the material reality of the book itself. I mean, making a book does have a climate impact that is not a positive one. So we tried to follow some of the same ethos from the exhibition of trying as best we could to reduce the impacts of that. So we did use fully recycled paper that had certain certifications from EU eco labels, and then we used recycled cover, used the most eco-friendly ink that was available, and we also opted not to shrink wrap the books. So the exhibition or the book was rooted in the exhibition, but it's not a catalog. It wasn't beholden to the exhibition. We were able to incorporate voices of other folks who were not in the exhibition, including Nadia Jakinski, Lisa Ravna-Finbog, Jamie Hamilton Ferris. These artists here, the Bureau of Linguistical Reality, Julia O'Malley and Lorelei Ivanoff. And it allowed us, I think, to really deepen questions that had arisen during the course of curating the exhibition. As any potential curator who's listening to this knows, working on an exhibition really often manifests as many questions as it answers. And sometimes those questions arise before you have time to try and answer them in the exhibition. And so this was a really nice way for us to kind of address some of those things that had been coming up. And one of those was around language, as I mentioned at the outset. Specifically, the use of the term sustainability, how we understand and relate to that term. And Lisa Ravna-Finbog has a great piece in the book where she kind of talks about the origins of sustainability coming from the 1700s and the forestry industry to kind of maximize yield of timber and balance it with the forest's ability to regenerate. So it's a word that has sort of origins in this extractive relationship to the land and doesn't feel like an appropriate word to use to talk about primarily indigenous practices related to land, certainly, but also other artists we talked to suggested other words such as reciprocity or sustaining. And both of these words, I think, gesture not only at practical ways we might work differently, but you also start to understand the idea that this work is about being in relation, it's about responsibility, and it's also about growth and change. So, also on the language topic, here you have the Bureau of Linguistical Reality. This is Heidi Quant and Alicia Escott. And they collaborate with the public to create words that express these complex experiences of living through a time of accelerating climate change and recognizing this gap that we often feel between a sensation or an emotional experience we're having and a real lack of words to convey that feeling. So here on the left, you see a word that they created in collaboration with a member of the community called agualation, and you can read the description of it there. So just to kind of wrap it all up, I mean, as we were putting this book together, it really felt like we didn't have enough time, or frankly, I felt that I didn't really have enough expertise about the process. But I think it's also important, as we did with the exhibition, to remember that this idea of perfection really is the enemy of progress. And that coalescing these voices for the book in this moment in time was a worthy pursuit. I had worked on an exhibition several years ago about women in the circumpolar region. And one of the things I found working on that is there's just a real paucity of material available that is published about women in Alaska, like really pretty egregious. And so this book, while not, encyclopedic complete, or even very masterful in how it was put together, I think offers a strong backbone of Alaska women and non-binary writers, offering their reflections on place. And because of the general lack, I think that is worth something for sure.
Definitely.
And I also want to just note that right before the books came out, we suffered the untimely loss of one of the contributing artists in a really tragic accident. and that's the artist Jenny Irene, and you can see their work here. And Jenny wrote for the book, and their piece of writing is, I think, especially precious to me, and I imagine to many of their loved ones, because we get to hear from Jenny in their own words when we're typically accustomed to understanding Jenny's voice through photographs. Their piece, How Do We Tell Stories of Place When That Place Is Gone, is a meditation on loss and continuance as they contemplate the decimation of the family fish camp in the wake of Typhoon Merbok. And Jenny in the work talks about their love of the family photo archive. And they say, these images tell me what my relatives celebrated and cared about, what they felt was important enough to record. I can see how each person performed in front of the camera and the evidence of their lives in our home region of the Seward Peninsula. This is how I remember through images and stories shared with me. And Jenny chose to focus their lens on place, a place that's experiencing immense and devastating change. And they met this challenge with attentiveness, creativity, and a belief that stories really can help people survive. And I think that this book attempts to do the same, though perhaps not as eloquently as Jenny did. So that that is what I have for you in terms of the images, and now we can just chat.
Sure. No, thank you. Can you hear me? I just
Yes,
put on, okay, good. Put on the, you might hear some excited museum visitors in the background as well.
I love it.
But I know it's very exciting. Thank you for sharing. That was really interesting to just kind of understand the beginnings of the project, kind of the process, both internally, kind of how your staff, like this kind of very immersive collaboration that is more than what a lot of museums do, right? Well, that is a little that you are really a part of the process with the artists or other outside contributors and collaborators. The I was just wondering, you talked a little bit about how you got started, but how you found the artists, like how you ended up going through your process and picking these different individuals who are from different parts of the world,
Yeah.
but still, again, addressing this kind of idea of we're all going through these changing climates and some living in places where it's happening much more rapidly than in other places, kind of, and what does that care look like? So just tell me about your process in bringing those people together.
Yeah. So it was kind of, I'd like to say I had more of a specific framework, but it was sort of intuitive. I didn't set out that this was like a criteria, but I think just naturally a lot of the artists ended up being artists that, whether or not they would self-identify as artists working with social practice, like do have some element of that embedded in their practice. So a strong kind of emphasis towards teaching, skill sharing,
Mm-hmm.
activism, um, things of that nature. Um, I was drawn to the work and to the way specific artists were tackling problems. Um, but also, I think one of the main things with this exhibition that I think is another important and often under discussed element of the whole sustainability question is personality fit.
Mm, yeah,
And, I did approach some artists that we didn't end up working with. It wasn't like we said no, but it just wasn't a good fit because, I pitched it as like, hey, are you interested in coming on this sort of um, journey with us
sure.
to try and do something, work a little differently. And I think the people that said yes have the requisite level of like curiosity and humility and kind of interest in exploring like what sustainability means within their own practice as well. And so I think that made for every artist we worked with was such a fantastic collaborator. And as you know, that doesn't always happen. And so I think just I think one aspect of that is just having a really clear like statement of values around a given
Mm,
project and seeing if that resonates with the artists that you want to work with. And like if it's not a good fit, I mean, the process is probably going to feel more like pulling teeth than like this more generative problem solving endeavor that you're working on together. So that was sort of functionally how we approached artists and started to work together. There was a strong focus on um, the North, but also I wanted it to be a more global
hmm
conversation. So we did work with artists from all over. Um, and I think, I was ahead of our conversation today. I was sort of thinking about how each project manifested care in different ways.
hmm
And um, I jotted down some notes, but I think sort of the different realms that we see are, this sort of quiet realm around attention and
hmm
listening. And there was a quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer that I put in my little intro to the book, where she says that a practice of attention acknowledges that we have something to learn from intelligences other than our own. Listening, standing witness, creates an openness to the world in which the boundaries between us dissolve in a raindrop. And so I see that present in a lot of the work in the exhibition, but coming through really strongly in Ellie Schmidt and Jamie Hamilton Ferris's piece in the book, as well as Christy Belcourt. I think it manifests as teaching and learning, skill sharing, and an openness to receive and reciprocate. And, Gay Chan's work, Amy Meissner does a lot of work around mending and repair, Marie Watt. I see that very present in their works. I think it also means risk, activism, like legal struggle and community
Sure. Yeah.
organizing. So these really like, boots on the ground approaches. And that comes through really strongly in Andrea Bowers and Tish Odell's piece in the book, in Martha Atienza's work, and also in the work of Carolina Caicedo. I think it also manifests a willingness to imagine and sort of look at things as if they could be otherwise. And that sounds kind of corny, but I think it's really important. And I think that's one way artists can sort of point the way forward for us. And Intelligent Mischief, Bureau of Linguistical Reality, Jesse French, and Mary Mattingly all kind of fall into that category for me. And then, really importantly, and kind of foundationally to the book and to the exhibition, I think it also care manifests as stewarding the culture of place,
Mm,
stories, and remembrance. And you see that coming through very clearly in the work of Nadia Jakinski, Erin Gingrich, Jenny Irene, Lorelei Ivanoff, many of the Alaska Native women that contributed to the volume, and also I think the work of Christy Belcourt and her wonderful interview with Tara in the book. So everybody's kind of coming at the issues from a different angle, but I think there's so much that's shared across a lot of
sure.
the artist
Yeah.
practices too.
Um, uh, it's wonderful. Yes, I feel like when I was reading through the essays and different contributions, kinds of some of those words that you just pulled out were used throughout about listening,
Mhm.
attention, I think another one was like embodied knowledge. There was I and experiences, and I think that I really it was really you could really it really came through. I hope you even though we I was not able to see the exhibition in person, just kind of uh, uh, the personal kind of engagement, the personal experience, and like stakeholding in all of the projects, and then how there's like an element. I feel like some when you talk about climate change, sometimes there can be this kind of element of doomsdayness or
Yeah.
like which as it should be, but also sometimes the practicality and like where is the optimism or where is the kind of like the actual living, like the actual like
Yeah.
moving forward, like what does that really look like in in a hopeful way, and not to be and not being like you, not being naive or not being
Mhm.
corny. It's just like to and I like that both the word thrive is
Mhm.
used often and in conjunction with survive, right? Because
Yeah.
the idea that we're not just talking about survival, but about living, about like yes,
Yeah, absolutely. I think in Alaska too, and in many northern regions of the world, like, oh gosh, we're all so tired of like the melting glacier imagery. And yes, I did share some melting glacier imagery in this talk, but uh it is, I think the Arctic is a place a lot of people are looking. You probably experienced this at the Arctic Art Summit you went to. A lot of artists are very interested, and sometimes that interest is really kind of surface level and sort of just reifies this sort of like lament about all of the things that we're losing. And
Mhm.
that is just not the energy, I think, of the people on the ground who are experiencing it most closely. It's not really an option to just, mourn and wring our hands. Like people are confronting these issues with a lot of creativity and a lot of resilience. So I think that was important to manifest. And one of the things I sort of wish that we had brought in more, but that I also think is important was humor. Like the Minerva
Yeah,
Crisis memes.
exactly.
Like
Yeah.
humor, I think, is another way um, that we grapple with and also find joy, in the present
Sure.
moment among challenge. So yeah, definitely trying to veer away from the doom and gloom narrative because I don't think it's helpful to anybody at this point.
Mm-mm. And I feel like it's so human. Like I just feel
Yeah.
like the humor, all of these different aspects that you just described, it really, you get that it's not just about an abstract exchanging environment. It's not about this. It's about people and about like some of those different things you just described are about that. Family. I mean, I feel
Hmm.
like family, like there's these certain aspects of the sharing and the skill sharing that you were that a lot of the artists had and that you described in the book that um uh they were great because it's very practical. It's like it
Yeah.
and sometimes and it's very simple. And I feel like we all probably encounter this sometimes when you're making publication like this or museum exhibitions where it's like um some people feel like, oh, well, that's what these artists do, or this is what something that this doesn't happen in my family, or this doesn't happen. Like, I don't know. I'm not an artist. I don't practice have a practice or anything.
Mhm.
When they do, when people do. And it really
Right.
is just that practice of living over those skills and traditions and things that you share.
Absolutely. I mean, Christy Belcourt talks about that in her piece of just like my mom knew the plants in the garden, so I know the plants. My mom canned food, so I can food. And these um, traditions that might connect you to your place or tether you to understanding with more attentiveness what's going on around you that may seem like humble or insignificant. Like I also talk about Erin Gingrich
I
and
love
her
that.
obsession with finding four-leaf clovers, like there are all kinds of practices available to us to kind of attune our awareness differently um, and not all of those things are like complicated or really heady,
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
exactly. It's simple. It's
Yeah.
yeah, walking, like
Yeah.
little, just the act of walking, and I guess I mean people say this all the time now, but like being present, like being just, and that's part of the attentiveness. I wanted to ask you before too long a little
Mhm.
bit about kind of the logistics, and then it's just so interesting the idea of a community climate archive, and
Mhm.
that this being this kind of some anecdotal in nature, some maybe just in the storytelling of your family or community, but just about how that was collected and then how it might be accessible in the future, or if that's something that you all were thinking about when you were doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Community Climate Archive was sort of like a small resolution to an idea that I'd been kicking around for a long time, like almost since I started working at the museum. And it really came out of the experience of growing up here and my memories of Halloween, which Halloween was always that we would have to wear snowsuits underneath our Halloween costumes or over them sometimes. And it was always really frustrating because it just really interfered with, looking great in your costume.
Sure, of course.
And like we always had snow at Halloween, and now it is it's really, I don't want to say it's necessarily rare, but it is, you know, it fluctuates. We've had many Halloweens in recent years where we don't have snow yet. And so I was thinking about like, the picture that many people take on the front porch before the kids go out wearing their Halloween costumes and how those pictures must be changing now that kids don't really need to get so geared up for the snow. And and so I was thinking, what would it be like if you could go through people's photo albums and not just for Halloween pictures, but like for all kinds of pictures that show these sort of subtle changes. But, logistically, it just seemed like an impossible project to pull off. I'd love to figure it out someday,
Yes.
to have just,
I think you can do it. I think we can all do
yeah.
it.
But so for this project, we decided to try and approach that by creating the community climate archive. So we basically put out an ask to lots of different Alaskans across the state and in different fields, variety of, a broad age range. We had some young people, we had older folks, we had professionals, we had citizens, there were scientists, artists, business owners. And we just asked folks to record a voice memo with their iPhone because we tried to make it really simple for people to
Sure.
participate.
Yeah.
So it was a voice memo with the iPhone. We sent a recording, um, like directions for people. So clear, like step by step, how to do it with a time limit, and asked folks to think of an image like that they could send along with their recording and to respond to one of several questions. And the questions were, in what ways have you seen yourself or others adapt during the climate crisis? Who or what has taught you about adaptation or survival? What have you noticed changing and how are you adapting to that change? How do we care for ourselves, others, or the land in the face of a changing climate? What gives you hope in the face of a changing climate? And what advice would you give to a young person or your own younger self about how to survive today? What reflections would you like to pass on to the future? So these were just prompts, and we asked folks to pick one and respond with an image. And so we got responses from over 50 people. We compensated folks just nominally for participating. And then we had monitors that were sequencing like the slideshow of all the
Hmm.
images, and you could
Oh, okay.
hear. So we had all the pictures on the wall, but then to engage with the audio, you would sit and listen and you'd see the picture come up and hear the person's voice reflecting on the image. And we do have it actually available online because that was
Oh,
one
great.
thing that we thought as we were doing it, like that this needs to be accessible. So I don't know if participants can see the chat.
Uh, I think they should be able to if
I'll just
you
copy paste
share
this.
with all. Let's see. Let me see. And if who can see your messages? Hosts and panelists. I think you should. Yes, you
Okay.
can. I just got a note from one of our
Yeah. Okay.
participants that like
Great.
you can see it. Good. No, that's wonderful. I'm glad to be able to share this because I was
Yeah.
very curious. Yep.
Yeah, so if you're curious, you can click through there. And if you can't see it, it's on the Anchorage Museum website under the How to Survive exhibition. You can click on Community Climate Archive, and then all of the photos are there with the audio recordings. You can, and I mean, all of them were wonderful. And it's just really great to hear like the variety of ways people are sort of like reflecting on and addressing the issue. And in terms of this idea of most everything was quite hopeful. Um, yeah, so that was a really fun piece of the project. We try and create spaces for community to have a hand in most of our exhibitions. But yeah, this one was really kind of trying to scratch this itch of like getting my arms around this bigger idea of like what is it what is this all these family archives like
Yeah,
mean, how could we use them to talk about climate change?
sure. How
Yeah.
can we make sure that they are kind of preserved in a way where you can share them out with others? Uh, how many submissions did you get?
We had over 50 people submit. And, I think we definitely could have kept going. At a certain point,
Right.
there's like
Yes,
logistical barriers you run up against. But I would love to see, a future iteration where we kind of, collect responses for an entire year. Because there's always, we last fall in October, there was a horrible ex-typhoon that hit Western Alaska, and a
Mm,
lot of people were relocated to Anchorage, evacuated from their villages. And, there's these really heavy, serious things going on. And it feels like whenever something like that happens in Alaska, it is a statewide conversation. It involves
sure.
everybody, and everybody is helping out, pitching in. Um, Trying to be involved in a way to support our neighbors, even if they live, hundreds or thousands of miles away. Um, so yeah, I think the way people think about this and feel about this evolves, day to day and year to year, depending on what types of challenges we're facing. So
Sure.
yeah.
I'm glad that you just used the word because I feel like something else that comes up a lot is support
Mm,
and community and like interconnectedness, like how that is kind of one of the foundational ideas about care, like and
mhm.
not on an individual, that it really is group. It is
Yeah.
people together.
Yeah, and it's about, yeah, this idea that you have a responsibility, to others. Um, yeah, I think it's really important.
I'm gonna just let people who are tuning in know that if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, and I can ask Francesca. But in the meantime, I did want to see what was happening in the future for you and your team, and for it sounds like this uh, the way that you organized this exhibit or put it together, it wasn't experimental really, but it was kind of like it was a test, it was a journey, it was a new
Mhm.
experience, right? And so I wonder if you feel like you've been able to carry some of that forward into projects now and how that might look in the future.
Yeah, so definitely, I mean, with a lot of the products and materials we used, for sure, like the museum, and I've noticed a lot of other museums actually, I'm not saying we started it, I think it's just natural that this happens, but
Right.
like are using this falcon board material, which is like this
Mm,
recyclable paper-based material that for signage. So we transitioned even before How to Survive went up. We had been experimenting with the material for the exhibition, and we just started using it in our other exhibitions. Um, there's, other materials that, we've transitioned to using different paints and light bulbs and, all this stuff that doesn't really sound sexy, but it has like
has
a,
impact. Yeah.
a practical impact.
Yeah.
Um, and then, I think one of the lasting outcomes of this just has been this conversation around like human capacity and the
Mm-hmm.
museum's sustainability effort. So I think that that is very much a part of the dialogue in a way that maybe it wasn't as much before. And it's really, I think, led us to think deeply, sort of ironically, the really big project I'm working on right now with my team. is a really wonderful collaboration with the Bishop Museum in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
And so this project, you know, is similar to How to Survive in that the sort of emphasis here is on the relationships, like establishing the relationships with this other museum and with makers in Hawaii and between Hawaii and Alaska, and like nurturing that and seeing if we can pull off this very large and collaborative project, which is not really a way that our museum has worked for an exhibition of this size a lot. I don't want to say ever, but it's not as common, especially with the distance between Alaska and Hawaii. You know, the
Sure.
shipping is quite
Yes.
expensive. So, you know, this is an exhibition where the carbon footprint is going to be significant, but I feel like it shares um, this sort of kindred approach with the How to Survive exhibition because it's asking the institution to work differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, you know, at a certain point, making a show it's always wonderful. It's always an opportunity to
Sure.
learn something new and to be in dialogue with new people. But um, it doesn't always, I feel like for me, push my practice as a curator into a realm of like discomfort or learning. And I'm more interested in doing projects these days that do push me and my colleagues to
Yeah.
try things that are new and to be like, well, we've never really done this and it's a little scary and like, can we figure it out?
Right.
I don't want to say you want every project to be like that because you will fully burn out and your nerves will be so fried. But I think it's important for, you know, to have a project like that every now and then that really, I think it offers an opportunity also for sort of learning and expertise across different departments to be like deployed differently and
Mm-hmm.
for people to collaborate differently on a project and hold different parts of a project that they may not typically be involved in. So yeah, that's sort of, I think, the way that some of the ethos of this project is living on in our practice. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wonderful. No, good. I mean, it's nice to see or hear and that even in small ways that it can, keep moving forward or I feel like um the publication is wonderful. And uh the fact that it is a little different than a regular exhibition catalog, and that you have these kind of interstitial like poems and different visual essays, and then different and that you outline from the beginning what you've just described, like in the like logistics of putting this project together on a staff level, like on an organization level, and all of that. I think um, it is a really great kind of uh, guidebook, I feel like, for other museums.
Well,
Uh,
that's nice to hear. You know, I feel like um part of the guide I think is really just like there is no right way to do this. And I think that is
exactly.
one of the things that was really quite liberating actually about working on this was just like going into it, we were like, we are going to be honest about our mistakes. And so
Right.
we made panels that really talked about different trade-offs, like things that didn't work out. And we spoke openly about that. And I think that that's important because I think there's this sensation, um, oftentimes in our culture around pretty much any topic that if you don't have like a certain level of expertise or commitment to something, that you can't really participate or be part of the conversation, that really discourages people from just starting or
Sure.
experimenting or trying. And, you know, we're not experts in this space. And also like to be perfectly honest, when you're trying to figure out what materials to use and the really like confusing and often obfuscating language that different products will use to talk about like the ingredients of their materials, et cetera.
Sure.
Like
Yep.
you kind of need like somebody on staff that's just dedicated to like parsing all the jargon, et cetera. But we were like, okay, we're gonna try it anyway, and we're just gonna be really clear about sort of where we're at and the limitations to what we're doing. And, so we did end up loaning a couple of items for the show. Not everything was fabricated on site, and we were really honest about that. And I think there's an element of museum work that is sort of like, going to the theater and like the curtains open and everything looks perfect. And you
Right.
have no sense of like the people with the rigging behind and all the work
Right.
that went into the making the set
Yeah.
and I think it's important for folks to remember like that a museum is really just a bunch of people sort of like problem solving on the fly together and that everything you see in the museum is the process of just like a big negotiation between a lot of people about how to
Sure.
do something.
Yeah.
And it's certainly not always right. And and
Right.
and that I mean that's life in general, right? So I think being really comfortable with that sort of like messy middle is also something that I'm trying to bring into my work more
Yeah.
because I think it's an important part of the process. It's also just more honest.
Sure. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And then, I mean, in turn, for most people, for many, for more accessible. Then I
Yeah.
feel like, I mean, more you can connect to this more, and then the stories that are being shared and different experiences. But it looks like we're right about at the hour of our wonderful talk. Thank you so much for tuning in and again for joining us, Francesca. I know before we sign off, I did want to mention our next author talk, which will be August 27th, and that is Quaker Whaler Trader Spy: The True Trials of William Roach. And should be a fun one. This will be with our Chief Curator, Naomi Slip, in conversation with Sarah Crabtree and Melissa Philly. But again, thank you to everyone who joined us. This will be available online um, soon in the next couple of weeks. And then, Francesca, we look forward to hearing more about more projects in the future and being in touch. And thank you so much again. It was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation, Imelda. Be
No
well.
problem. Yeah. Bye. Bye, everyone.